A few years back, my family went to Universal for Christmas. It was around that time that they just opened up their new replica of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. And my friend and I both wanted to go. Neither of us were loaded enough to stay at the resort inside the park, but we were able to get rooms in the same cheaper hotel just a few miles away. As tainted as my memory of that weekend is, I clearly recall that the day we spent roaming through the park together was a blast. Everything was festively decorated and covered in snow, a big deal for Florida boys after a long day of walking through the park and visiting all the attractions, pigging out on various choosy culinary concoctions at the chocolate factory, and coercing our parents into buying a bunch of gifts. The sun was setting on our Christmas vacation. However, we still had one more night at the hotel. Our parents had planned this in advance and had gotten a little too drunk to drive all the way home while our parents were passed out in bed. My friend and I couldn't sleep. Our minds were buzzing with all the things we'd done that day, and we didn't want it to end. Just yet, we were dueling each other on a mobile game when he messaged me. "Yo, I saw a gym on the way up. You want to race on the treadmills?" My feet were still sore from all the walking, but it seemed like a good way to blow off some steam. Sure, but how do we get in?" "Don't worry about it. I'll use my room key, just meet me on my floor." That meant I'd have to sneak out and go downstairs, but that wouldn't be hard. My parents were out cold. The only trouble I had was finding where they put the room key so I could get back in unnoticed. It took several tense minutes of digging through my mother's purse in the dark, but I finally found it. I carefully opened the door and slipped out, heading quickly for the elevator. I only got a few steps in before I heard somebody walking behind me. I stopped and turned around and immediately got stranger danger. There was a man standing in the hallway, half dressed as Santa Claus. And by that, I mean he was half naked. All he had on were the boots, the fake beard, and a stocking cap, along with the most strained pair of stained briefs I've ever seen. Other than that, he carried a flimsy red sack that didn't look very full-et. I immediately spun back around and started power walking to the elevator. I heard him shuffling behind me, trying to catch up when I got to the elevator. I spammed the down arrow. I knew that wouldn't make it go any faster, but my panic brain was willing to try anything. By the time the doors finally opened, I could feel the creep right behind me, breathing down my neck. "Well, aren't you going in? You can go first. No problem. My little angel." I stepped aside and let him through. As he boarded the elevator, he sang, "All I want for Christmas is you." Then he retrieved something from his limp sack and stretched his arm through the doorway, holding out an unwrapped candy cane. There was a bunch of red lint from the sack stuck onto it, but not wanting to aggravate him. For any reason, I took it without any intention of eating it. Finally, he dropped his arm and cleared the doorway. We stared at each other for a few unbearable seconds, until at last the door slid closed and I was freed from his gaze. I didn't see him push any buttons, so I was worried he would open the doors and reappear at any second to make sure I didn't run into him again. I took the stairs down to my friend's floor, but of course, my woes were not done for the night. The first thing I saw when I opened the door into the hallway was my friend having a seizure. I dropped the candy cane and rushed to him, calling out for help. "Help, help somebody," calling cops. "Help." My friend was frothing at the mouth, his eyes, pure white from rolling back into his head, thrashing violently. Despite all my attempts to calm him down, there was nothing I could do. It wasn't until he already gone limp and unresponsive that people finally emerged from their rooms to see what was going on. I'm no doctor, but I knew at that point he was already dead. Nobody ever talks about how people empty their bowels and bladder in their moment of death. I'm not a detective either, but I had a pretty good idea as to what had killed him. Clutched in his dying grip was the same kind of dusty, unwrapped candy cane that the half-naked Santa had given me in the following month, once I was subpoenaed to testify against that worthless turd of a man. And during my appearances in the court, I got to learn far more than I wanted to. The hotel security cameras had ample footage of the man stalking multiple people in the hallways and trying to offer them his candy canes, which he laced with some kind of extremely potent poison. No matter how many times he raved about it, I'll never understand his delusional motive. Something about bringing people closer together for Christmas by sending them all to heaven. I don't even care anymore, but the civil suit against the hotel is still going on. I hope my friend's parents get a fortune from that hotel for their negligence, letting a man like that roam around their hallways during the holiday. What the hell is going on out here? Why are there so many people here at 9 a.m.? It's Wednesday. I know I'm in high school, but don't. You people have anything better to do? Don't you have jobs or something? Finally, what? In the Y is everyone right there? So much for showing up early for a good spot in line. Oh no, is that really Santa Claus? What happened to him? It looks like he hasn't eaten since last year. All right, I'm next. I can finally make a wish and get out of here. Has he even? Blinked this whole time. Why does he keep looking at me? Is he okay? What's going on? Why is that kid crying? Well, it's my turn and I can't hold up the line here. I go. Hi, Santa Clausy. Hello. There you, dashing young man. Come take a seat on old Saint Nick's knee. Okay, is that... Okay, oh, did I say knee? I meant my lap. Come closer, boy, I'm hard of hearing, wow. Hey, ow, what was that? What, in your pants? I felt something. Oh, you mean that, what are you talking about? Shush. Come here, boy, that's Sant's secret, I keep it on me, so when I'm traveling through certain areas, I can use it on guests who make things exciting. Huh, you mean like a knife or something? Never mind that, it won't hurt you. Just take a sit on the other side of Santa's lap. Okay? Hurry up. Now I don't have all day, I'm sorry. Mr. Santa Claus, we can be quick. I promise. Good. Now, what's your name, boy? My name's K. Keith and Keith. Do you know if you're on the nice list or the naughty list this year? The nice list, I've been good, have you? Now I'll be the judge of that. Now, tell me, what do you wish for Christmas? Well, sir, it's about my girlfriend B. Your girlfriend, that doesn't sound like something a nice boy would have. What is it you want with this girlfriend I want to have? That is a naughty wish, and it just put you back on the naughty list. No, please, I take it back. I'll wish for something else. It's too late for that. There's no way that I can give you a present if you're on the naughty list. Elves, take him away. Please, can't you make an exception? It's not like I wish for something bad. Please, enough. I can make your wish come true, but you have to stop causing a scene, all right? Okay, I'm sorry, Santa. What can I do? Wait a few hours until my clock out then. Meet me by my car in the parking lot. It's the one that looks like a magic sleigh. I'll take you to my, workshop. Yes, thank you, Santa. I love you. That's what I like to hear now. Smile for the camera. Santa, is that you? So you found my car. Now get in the car already. Can you see where we're going? Of course I can. I live right around the corner. I know a shortcut too. Want to see what are you doing? Stop it. Slow down. You crazy, you're going to crash. Please stop. You didn't think I kept my job by driving. Slow. Did you just slow down for the love of God? Please, fine, but only because we're here. What is wrong with you? What's wrong with me? Nothing. How else do you think I made it to every house in the world in one night? Just get inside, hurry up. Now I don't want you to get cold. Go on Santa, who had the fire going while you were gone. Why, it was one of my elves of music. Course you're so naive. There's no escape for you. Now you're going to become real familiar with my North Pole. Get back here. I just want to show you where the compass points. Stay away from me. You freak. There's no way you're getting out of here until I let you, and that's not happening for a long time. So just stop making this harder on yourself. Ho, ho, ho. No, no, no. Yet another tale of terror this year at the community mall, the beloved local Santa Claus. We have all known, and L for years was arrested yesterday on multiple charges alleging rampant abuse of guests who visited the mall during the Christmas season. This story was inspired by a disturbing mall incident that happened in Seattle, BLE. A 72-year-old former shopping mall Santa Claus was sentenced for his crimes after being accused of violating multiple mall guests. While on the job, the man's name is Ronald Carroll McDonald. It was alleged that he wanted to be a mall Santa just so he could target younger customers under the radar. Ronald's son ended up asking the judge that his father be given the maximum sentence. Ronald was seen sobbing as he apologized to his family and to the relatives and friends of his victims in the courtroom. He later stated that he was quote-unquote Satan and not Santa, and that he knows everyone wishes him hell. Ronald pleaded guilty for his heinous actions and was sentenced accordingly. A few years ago, I worked at a mall as an elf in Santa's village. I had been hired from an agency just like all the other elves, photographers, security, and of course the mall. Santa. The mall wouldn't hire anyone outside of the agency since background checks were very important to them. When I first started out, we had a really good team. Then the guy playing Santa quit, and they brought in someone else. It was another cliché old chubby guy with a gray beard. But there was something really creepy and unsettling about this guy. His name was Arthur, and he always acted weird towards everyone. He didn't seem to know how to interact with people. Everyone felt very uncomfortable around him. But what I found weird was how Arthur acted worse towards females than he did guys. He was generally very rude to the women, and a lot nicer to the guys. He was especially nice to me, which made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. Every time he spoke to me, he would compliment me about something, and then look at me in the creepiest way. "Hey, darling, do you like candy canes?" "No, I don't." "If you don't say yes, I'm going to put you in my naughty list." "Darling, stop calling me that." I even noticed he was nicer to the boys who sat on his lap. He would talk to them for way longer than the girls, and he seemed to give them special attention. It was all very strange. I mostly tried to avoid Arthur as much as I could, but it was difficult, since we worked together all the time. I would always leave work as quickly as possible when my shift ended, so that he wouldn't have time to talk to me. After one shift, I was starting to leave when Arthur walked up to me. "Hey, can you do me a favor?" He gave me a creepy and awkward smile. I immediately wanted to leave, but I didn't think I could just ignore him. What do you need?" Arthur then went into a whole story about how he had pulled some muscle in his back and couldn't drive home. Apparently, some kid had pulled his back from sitting in his lap. It all sounded like a lie to me, but I couldn't tell for sure. "So, do you think you could drive me home and help me up to my apartment?" I didn't want any part of it, and I told him that I couldn't do it. I just wanted to leave, but he kept asking me over and over again. I refused him multiple times, but he wouldn't stop. He told me that he wouldn't be able to get home without my help, but I finally gave in and agreed to drive him home the whole time we were in the car. I felt really creeped out. Arthur kept trying to make conversation, but it was all awkward and weird. I said as little as possible and just focused on getting to his apartment as fast as I could. Then, at one point, he reached out and put his hand on my lap. It was creepy as hell. I was so grossed out and just wanted to get the whole thing over with. Finally, we got to his apartment. I just wanted to drop him off and get the hell out of there, but he insisted that he need my help getting upstairs, so I reluctantly got out of the car and helped him up to his place. We moved really slowly, and Arthur leaned on me the whole time. We eventually made it to his door, and I told him that I had to go. Arthur then told me to wait by the door for a second as he wanted to give me a gift for helping him. He then took out his phone and snapped a picture of me. Then he went to his room. I stood there, confused, and impatiently waited for him. Several minutes passed, and Arthur still didn't come back. I began to feel sick to my stomach, and I had a very uneasy feeling that something was wrong, so I decided to leave. But then, as I started to turn around, Arthur appeared in the doorway out of nowhere. He was half naked, wearing only his underwear and holding a metal rod. He stared at me with a sick smile on his face, then swung the rod at me. I instinctively ducked as Arthur barely missed me and smashed the wall instead. "Ah, help me!" I pushed Arthur to the floor and immediately ran down the hallway towards the elevator as fast as I could. I made it to the elevator and maniacally pushed the button for it to open. As I did, I looked behind me to see Arthur slowly slide out of his door. We made eye contact just as the elevator doors opened and he started running at me. I entered the elevator and frantically tried to close the door as Arthur got closer and closer. At the last second, the door closed just as Arthur smashed his rod into it. I could hear him slamming it against the door over and over again. "You can't run from me. I'm going to smash your head." The elevator finally started to move downstairs, and Arthur's beating grew quieter as soon as I reached the first floor. I ran the hell out of the building. I didn't even think to get in my car. I just kept running and running, trying to put as much distance between me and Arthur as possible. When I had finally gotten far enough away, I entered a random store and called the cops. Arthur was later arrested at his apartment. It was later revealed that Arthur was a divorced man who was interested in younger men. He had allegedly killed multiple young guys in the greater Toronto area that were all around my age. He would then dismember them and put them in flower pots that he kept around his home. I remembered seeing several of them in his apartment. But what was even more disturbing is that Arthur took photos of his victims before and after killing them. That's when I remembered him taking a picture of me. I was completely traumatized but happy that I had gotten away before Arthur had taken the second picture. This story was inspired by a horrific case revolving around a man who worked as a shopping mall Santa Claus, who allegedly took the lives of 8 men and hid their remains inside plant pots that he would then rearrange from time to time. The culprit was a 70-year-old man named Bruce MacArthur, who preyed on multiple younger men in Canada's gay village and got away with a string of horrific crimes. Over 7 years, MacArthur would photograph his victims before and after they were taken out and kept a picture of him as a grim trophy. When the police finally caught up with MacArthur, they found potential victim number 9 in his bed, with his before picture already taken. The man has since been sentenced and has been dubbed by the police as the serial killer. Santa, what I'm about to tell you was the most terrifying experience that I have ever lived through. It's something that I will never forget. It happened years ago around Christmas. I have a wife and 1 son. They're the most important people in my life. I would do anything for them. That's what terrified me about that day the most, the thought that something might happen to one of them. My wife used to be friends with this woman named Janet. I got along with her husband, okay, but we weren't really close. We only ever saw each other when our wives hung out. Janet and her husband had a son as well, so it was a nice situation. The 2 kids could play together while the adults talked. And we never had to get a babysitter. One year, Janet invited our family over for Christmas dinner. Unfortunately, her husband had to work late that night and couldn't attend, so it would just be me. my wife Janet, and our 2 sons. I was surprised that Janet would invite us over on a night that her husband worked, but we of course accepted the invitation, so we headed over to Janet's house for dinner. That night it all went well. At first, the food was delicious and we had pleasant conversations. Janet seemed slightly on edge, but I assumed that it was just the stress of the holiday getting to her. I knew I felt burnt out from all the preparations. Then something strange happened. I heard creaking noises coming from upstairs as we ate. I thought it was odd since no one else was supposed to be home. I asked Janet about it, but she just said something about the house being old. "Oh, it creaks like that all the time. Don't worry about it." It happened several more times during the meal. At one point, I could have sworn that I heard footsteps coming from upstairs, but I just ignored it, based on what Janet had said. It had to just be the old house. Eventually, we finished dinner and headed to the living room. The kids went upstairs to play while my wife, Janet, and I conversed and had some wine. Another hour went by without any event, and I realized that it was getting to be pretty late. I was just about to ask my wife if she was ready to leave when suddenly the scariest thing happened. I heard screaming coming from upstairs. My wife and I immediately started panicking, but Janet remained strangely calm. Then I realized it was our son. I immediately ran upstairs to see what was wrong, but when I got up there, all the lights were turned off. For some reason, it was incredibly dark. The screaming had stopped, and I had no idea where it had come from. It was difficult to make out anything in the darkness. "Son, where are you?" He didn't answer. I really started to panic. Then I ran through the dark hallway, checking different rooms. I couldn't find my son anywhere. Then I saw some light peeking out from under a closed door. I frantically opened the door and barged into the room, and I couldn't believe what I saw. My son was lying on the floor with a large man dressed as Santa hovering over him. My son looked scared to death. The man was dressed up like Santa with a wig, beard hat, and boots. But he was in underwear. It was terrifying. What the hell is going on? The man didn't say anything. He just stared at me from behind the fake beard and wig. Then he made a move like he was going to attack me. I quickly pushed him out of the way and grabbed my son. He started crying as I escorted him downstairs. In a total panic, I told my wife to get our stuff together, and then started cussing at Janet. "What the hell is wrong with you?" She seemed confused about what was happening. I asked her why she would lie about her husband being at work. I knew she had to be in on the whole thing. Janet just stared at me and my wife gauntly and didn't say anything. As a matter of fact, she had this disturbing grin on her face. My family and I were horrified. We got out of that house and drove home as fast as we could. My son was still in shock and crying. I still couldn't believe what happened either. We knew that family. My wife had been friends with Janet for ages. It didn't make any sense. My family found it incredibly disturbing that Janet would pretend that her husband was at work while he was actually hiding upstairs the whole time. It explained everything, though that was why Janet seemed strange the whole time. The creaking noises that I heard were obviously him moving around. The most horrifying thing was what her husband intended to do to our son. And why was he dressed as Santa on the ride home? My wife got a text from Janet that said, "Is everything okay?" We were totally disgusted. The family had to be completely insane. Why was she still playing innocent? My wife texted back and told Janet that her and her husband were sick and needed help. Janet left it on red, and that was the last time they ever spoke. Janet hasn't responded since my wife completely cut her off as a friend. Of course, we still couldn't understand how they got along so well. For such a long time, we tried to report them to the police, but they said that it was just their word against ours. There was nothing they could do. My son was in shock for a long time, but he eventually got over it. Mostly I, for one, am still scared. I can't imagine what would have happened if I hadn't made it to that room in time. I just know that there's something extremely wrong with that family and that they need help. This is downright one of the most disturbing stories. It was a fan-submitted story regarding a viewer who claims he and his family experienced when invited to his mother's friend's Christmas dinner during the year 2016. Allegedly, the viewer's family opted out of not to file any charges against the dad or family. The viewer remains traumatized about the ordeal and shares his horrific incident every last Christmas Eve. My parents dragged me out to the mall along with my little sister. Early on in the night, I got bored and knew I wouldn't be able to stand shopping for clothes any longer. I convinced my parents to let me go explore the rest of the mall while they got presents from me and my sister, but of course, in typical fashion, they only agreed to it. If I took my little sister along with me, I agreed and promised that I would call as soon as we were ready to leave and meet up at the Foot Locker. We walked around for a little while, but there was still nothing that piqued my interest. My sister, however, really wanted to see Santa. Not that she believed in him really, but she thought the concept of Santa was fun for some reason anyways. We got lined up in the center of the mall where they had a bunch of fake North Pole scenery put up around a Christmas house that was supposed to be Santa's cabin or whatever. Nobody could actually see Santa because you had to go inside the cabin and meet him and get your pictures. Because we couldn't see, we had no idea why it was taking so long for the line to move, with 20 or 30 people ahead of us. The estimated wait time was almost an hour, but it's where my sister wanted to go and I didn't have any better idea. So we stuck it out, unfortunately. After about a half an hour, the soda that I had at the food court was hitting my bladder. I really had to take a leak, so I told my sister to go on without me or to hold my place in line. If she was still waiting when I got back, then I raced off to the nearest restroom. Just a few minutes later, I was done, and I went back to the Santa setup to see that my sister was no longer in line. I figured she was inside the cabin, but after I saw a few people go out and no sign of her, I got confused and decided I should check inside. I tried to tell them what happened, but those heartless help or elves didn't care at all. I pleaded with them to just let me check, saying that I didn't want to take any pictures and just wanted to make sure my sister was okay. But they didn't believe me. They just wrinkled their noses and told me to get in the back of the line, not knowing what else to do. I did, and everybody in the line gave me weird looks. While I walked back, I was even more annoyed when I saw that the line had doubled in size since I left it. I was fuming the whole time. I waited mad at myself for leaving the line and cursing out everything in my head. My sister didn't have a cell phone, so she was basically helpless without me. I was responsible for her, and if I didn't get her back, I was going to be in some deep trouble with my parents. So I waited and waited and waited, until finally, after a ridiculous amount of time, I got in. As soon as I stepped in, a chill ran down my spine. It was super dark in there, and it smelled kind of funny. To my left was the Santa, but I've never seen such a wrong guy to play the part. He was all scrawny and ghoulish, with sunken-in eyes and a patchy beard. The only part of him that was fat was ginormous beer gun, which was way out of proportion with the rest of him. He was hideous. I couldn't tell if he was trying to do a Christmas or Halloween thing, but I'd come all the way, so I had to try talking to him. "Hello, have you seen a little girl with dark hair about this? Hi probably laughed at you instead of asking for presents. Whoa, there kiddo, aren't you going to ask for presents?" "No, I don't care about presents. I'm just looking for my sister. This is the last place she was at. Have you seen her?" "Oh, come on. I won't be cheesy, like all the other Santas. You don't have to sit in my lap or anything. You just have to pick one of these 3 presents here." The presents were laying in his lap, a blue one on the left, a green one on the right, and a red one in the middle. I hadn't noticed them before because, well, Who wants to look at the crotch of somebody who looks like that? Not sure. I'll tell you what, if you let Santa do his job, Santa will help you do yours. You mean you help me find my sister? Of course, all right. Then Merry Christmas, I guess. That's the spirit. Come here and take your pick. I'll give you a hint. I really recommend picking the red one. I looked him up and down suspiciously. I wasn't a complete. I knew what he might be trying to do, but I wasn't sure. In spite of him, I pointed to the blue one. He screamed, picked up the present, and hurled it against the wall. A bunch of Christmas chocolates exploded from, and it went everywhere. Hey, what are you doing? I'm telling you to pick the red one. No, I picked the green one. You just think you're hot stuff, don't you? Well, let me tell you something, you little snaggle. Tooth twink. I eat punks like you for a living. Is that what you want, huh? For me to turn you in the next year's chocolate? Dude, what are you even saying? Don't play dumb with me. Just pick the red one already. Come on, you want to find your little sister, don't you? Fine. I picked the red one. He took the lid off the box, but I couldn't see what was inside it. The demented Santa waved his hand for me to come closer, and I did so. With extreme caution, I peeked my head over and saw that it was full of candy canes, all different shapes, colors, and sizes, like what you see. Go ahead, grab the biggest candy cane you can find and eat it. Oh God, why am I doing this? I put my hand inside the box and fished around for a few seconds. I couldn't feel anything that seemed obviously bigger than everything else until something at the bottom of the box was wrong, really wrong. I jerked my hand out of the box and jumped back. I was about to curse out the Santa, but when I saw him again, I was speechless. He had completely unhinged his jaw and was laughing at me like a psychotic, inhuman demon. I began to exit the cabin when the psychotic Santa lunged up from his seat, sprinted across the room, and cornered me against the wall. That's when the Santa pressed his demented face against mine and handed over the red box saying Merry Christmas. And make sure you eat the biggest candy cane. Last instinct took over, and I broke away at the last second, sprinting through the exit. That's when I found my sister huddled up against the wall by herself, eating a candy cane. I slapped it out of her hand, grabbed her by the arm, and took us back to our parents. When we finally reached the Foot Locker, I asked her, "What were you doing in there while I was in the bathroom?" "Nothing, I was just eating a candy cane that Santa gave me. While I was waiting for you, I was really freaking out and had to call my parents right away. They raced over to us and I told them everything. They immediately called the cops, and a few minutes later that CO was in handcuffs, despite him being locked away. It will never change what happened. This is the image of the quote-unquote candy cane Santa. He was a 63-year-old Arkansas native who worked as a mall Santa at a local plaza and was arrested for his heinous crimes. The minimum sentence of his charge was 18 days, or a maximum sentence of 1,587 years. I think it's safe to say he'll be sharing candy canes in prison going forward. Everybody knows that Santas aren't the sort of people you should readily trust around children, which must be why there's always a crowd of elf characters in that area to keep the costumed man in check. I, for one, am certainly glad that this is the case, but likely not, for the reason you'd expect. I have a terribly clear memory of one occasion with one of these mall Santas. I was much younger at the time, young enough to still be interested in the idea of Santa Claus, but more than old enough to have my doubts about the truth of it. My whole family went out to the community mall for some last-minute Christmas shopping. The first thing that caught my attention was the staging area right inside the entrance, where Santa Claus was granting wishes and taking pictures along with his team of elves. To my recollection, that was probably the most wholesome and charming Santa Claus charade the mall ever had. All the kids in line looked so excited to talk to the one and only Saint Nicholas. I immediately started begging my parents to let me go see him. "Mom, can we go see Santa Claus maybe later?" "Honey, the line is too long. We'd be there all day. We should go shopping while we have all our energy." "Okay, but if it's short or later, can we go?" "Sure, sweetie pie, you've been nice this year." I guess my parents wanted to buy what they could before everything was gone. It didn't make sense to me at first, but the longer they made me wait, and the more times they asked me what I wanted for Christmas, the more it began to dawn on me that Santa Claus wasn't really the person who gave out the presents every year. Obviously, it was just the parents who bought things for their children. Otherwise, what would be the point of asking Santa Claus to get me something if Mom had just gotten me everything I wanted right in front of me? So, by the end of the shopping spree, I was in a pretty sour mood. I know that every kid has to realize this at some point, but having the magic stripped away so close to Christmas brought on a lot of conflicting emotions for the younger me, but it would only get worse from there. As we were about to leave the mall with our purchases in tow, we all noticed how much shorter the line for Santa had gotten. Look at that, honey. You could almost walk right up to him at that point. I didn't even want to talk to him anymore. The glow was all gone, and now it seemed like every one of the few kids that were waiting in line were almost scared. Despite that, I just didn't have the energy to say no at the time. So we all shuffled into the queue so I could get to sit on Santa's lap. But as we got closer and closer, I started to see that the line wasn't the only thing that had changed in the few hours since I'd last seen the staging area. Santa Claus looked different before he'd been this jolly. Old, warm, and fuzzy-looking Grandpa, but now he didn't even look like the same person anymore. And it wasn't just that his fake beard wasn't on right, it looked like he was wearing some kind of mask. The smiling rosy cheeks from before had turned pale and droopy. I was extremely nervous by the time I got to the front of the line, but I don't think the rest of my family was paying attention. Everybody's just tired, that's all. Go on, honey, go get your picture. Timidly, I stepped up to Santa's lap without a word. He picked me up with a vice grip and shoved me down between his legs. "And what do you want for Christmas, kid?" I couldn't respond. I was frozen with fear. I couldn't explain well. "Kid, come on, spit it out. You're not the real Santa, huh? What you say? Speak up." "I'm old. I said you're not the real Santa Claus, you're a fake." I'd seen this movie where a guy tears the fake beard off the mall. Santa, I thought it would be a great way to expose this guy who was giving me the creeps. But when I reached up with a quickness and yanked the white ball of fluff with all my might, more came off than I expected. The entire face peeled off and crumpled up in my stunned grasp. The real face of the man beneath was caked in blood and bits of tissue, grinning at me maniacally with all wretched manner of craggly teeth and sharp features. After that initial moment of shock, he threw me off to the ground and started running for the door. I remember being unable to move, hearing a cacophony of shrieks and shouts and wailing. The man didn't get far. The security guards ran him down with an initiative I'd never seen from a mall cop before, or since. In the coming days, we found out that the original Santa Claus actor was discovered in his van out in the mall parking lot, naked with his face cut off. He went on break and never came back. We never learned that psycho's motive, but one thing's for sure. I will never forget that moment every time I hear the name Santa Claus come up. "You boy, go get me some fresh meat from the food court." "Okay, sir." Just several years ago, I had a terrifying experience with Santa Claus. I still believed that Santa was real, and I thought he could do anything. I was just like every other kid my age, until one day my mom always had this large mark on her face For as long as I can remember, I was always used to seeing her like that, and it never really bothered me. But sometimes the other kids at school would tease me and make comments about it, calling her names like Two-Faced from the Batman movies. I didn't like them talking bad about my mother. It upset me. My mom was basically my hero. She had raised me by herself for my whole life. One year, it was getting close to Christmas. I told my mom that I wished that Santa would fix the mark on her face. I told her to ask Santa to do it for Christmas, but my mom told me that it was okay and that she didn't need the mark to go away. She said it was a skin condition that she had since she was little. I tried to change her mind, but she insisted that it didn't matter. I figured that my mom just didn't want to ask for herself, so I decided that I would ask the Santa. Next time I saw him, I believed he was the real Santa, like most gullible kids did. So one day I convinced my mom to take me to the mall. I told her that I wanted to see the Christmas decorations. She didn't really want to at first, but I kept begging her until she finally agreed to take me. When we got to the mall, my mom let me go off by myself, and we agreed to meet back at the front. At a certain time, I immediately got in line to see Santa. There was a pretty big line of kids already there, so I had to wait a while. I watched Santa talk to the other kids while I stood there, but there was something off about him. He looked creepy, as I couldn't fully explain why, but he didn't look like a regular Santa. I was a little freaked out, but I was still just a gullible kid. I didn't think there could be anything wrong with Santa. I told myself that Santa was just having a bad day or something. When I finally reached the front of the line, I immediately went to sit on his lap. That's when I noticed he was looking at me in this creepy way. "What do you want for Christmas, little boy?" Even his voice was scary. He wasn't even trying to sound like Santa. I asked him if he could take away the mark of my mom's face. He immediately said that he couldn't. I asked him again and again, but he kept refusing. I didn't understand how Santa could refuse my request. I kept pushing him, thinking he was just testing me or something. Finally, the Santa just completely snapped. He started yelling at me to stop asking him. "Stop asking me that, just shut the hell up, before I get security to kick you out of this mall. You spoiling little brat." I was really scared. Now I got off his lap and tried walking away, but the scariest, most blood-curdling thing happened to me. The Santa went psycho and lunged at me. He grabbed me by the shoulders and started shaking me around like a rag doll. "Stop it, Santa, you're hurting me." I was absolutely terrified he wouldn't let me go. He just kept holding me there with his hands digging into my shoulders. All I could recall was that I started to cry loudly. I remember the Santa saying over and over again, "Shut up, shut the hell up." That's when the elves were finally able to pull Santa off of me. He just kept glaring at me with the creepiest face ever. The elves tried to ask me if I was okay, but I just wanted to find my mom. My mom was waiting for me, and I told her everything that happened. I was completely traumatized. My mom totally freaked out and told me that she was going to have the Santa arrested. She made me go back and point him out to her. I just wanted to go home, but my mom insisted that he wouldn't get away with it. We walked back over and I pointed out the Santa to her. I waited for my mom to start yelling at him, but she took one look at him and then immediately grabbed me and took me home. She had this terrified look on her face as we left. I asked her why she didn't call the police, but she told me to forget everything that happened. She made me promise that I wouldn't bring it up again. I always wondered why my mom was so scared of Santa. She never talked about it again. Years later, when I was old enough to know that Santa wasn't real, I asked her about the ordeal again. She hesitated for a moment, but then decided that I was old enough to know the truth. She told me that Santa was her ex-husband and my dad. The reason that she had never told me what happened to him is because he was incredibly abusive. She told me that the mark on her face wasn't a skin condition. It was actually a scar from L laceration, caused by my dad before I was born, after she had me. She left him out of fear that he would hurt me too. It was all hard for me to take in it. Really freaked me out that I had been so close to my actual dad. I couldn't believe that he had given my mom that scar. Everything made more sense to me now after knowing the truth. I'm still traumatized by M. Santas every time I see one. I think about that day. I don't know what my dad would have done to me if I hadn't. Our away in time. The story was inspired by a real submitted story that allegedly happened to the victim when they were younger. The subscriber has mentioned that his mother has since had a restraining order on the ex-husband, and that he hadn't heard or seen his dad since the M-San R. Deal. This story is from the point of view of a 15-year-old boy. I had lived in this dingy 2-story house since the day I was born. It was quite the dread living in, as the ERs would malfunction during the winter, so we always made sure to have the fireplace on. But what made the house extra terrifying was how close it was to a prison. I've always wondered for a very long time why my parents chose to live in such a dangerous place. So last year, I pestered my dad about moving out and looking for a better place to stay. But every time I tried to persuade him, he would brush me off and tell me how this house had been passed down for generations and had always brought good fortune and prosperity to the family. As an only child, my parents felt it would be appropriate to hire a nanny, someone they could trust to take care of me, especially when they were out. So ever since I was 2, this old nanny was basically my roommate. Her presence made me feel safer and less frightened about the nearby prison. However, I still had the habit of looking out my window, checking out the massive wall, with barbed wire flowing with electricity. I couldn't tell whether I was amazed or if some part of me was still afraid. I mean, who wouldn't be if you knew your neighbors were some of the most diabolical people ever known to mankind, clustered under one? Wouldn't that make your heart beat a little faster, knowing this prison had maximum security? I felt a sense of relief that prompted me to close the curtain and go to bed. Then, the following night, I came home late, after playing games at my friend's house a few blocks away, and upon seeing our garage empty, I knew my parents weren't home yet, but it didn't matter. I knew Sabrina would be home to keep me company, like she always did, even if we didn't have long conversations. However, when I entered the kitchen to grab something from the fridge, I read a note from Sabrina saying she had to go home to rectify an issue involving her close relatives. In her note, she promised that she'd try to come back as soon as possible, and so she reminded me to keep all the doors and windows locked and to hit the sack early. However, without supervision, I instead took the opportunity to play my phone. And when I checked the time, noticing it was 12, I decided to call it a night. Then, lying comfortably on the bed with my eyes heavy as sandbags, I heard loud footsteps emanating from downstairs. Half asleep, I initially thought the nanny had returned with some heavy bag or something. I hastily ran down the stairs to greet her, even though she often told me not to. But as I descended to the first floor, a cold sensation wrapped around my skin. Then, gazing into the darkness before me, my throat went dry as I called out and said, "Sabrina, is that you?" I waited, but there was no answer, and so I called out to her once more, "Hey, Sabrina." However, nothing but silence filled the air. "Sabrina, this isn't funny," I yelled in exasperation. Then seconds later, I heard one of her trash bins topple over, followed by a low, menacing chuckle. I stood still, and as soon as my body quivered, I had second thoughts about staying there, convinced that the best thing to do was just run upstairs and hide. However, I was too scared to move. Moments later, someone began to emerge from the darkness, and as the mysterious person came toward me, revealing their identity under the foyer, dim lights, I instantly recognized it wasn't Sabrina. Instead, he was a large man. He was leaning about 7 feet tall, wearing an orange t-shirt and pants. He had long, thinning hair and was disheveled like he hadn't showered in days. He didn't say a word, and that was the most terrifying thing. Not knowing what he planned to do made me panic. Then all hell broke loose when the large man made direct eye contact with me. Triggered by the adrenaline, I began sprinting up the stairs, locked myself in a room, and hid under the bed. And never crossed my mind that I would come face to face with a stranger in my house. But I didn't know where else to go as I bit my nails in sheer terror. I could hear the man running around my house, smashing into walls and tearing the place down. Sue? I heard the sounds of furniture breaking and glass shattering, and then that's when all the lights around the house went out. You get hide from me. I tried to crawl out from under the bed, desperately searching for a phone to call 911, but I couldn't see amidst the darkness still. I didn't give up. However, as time passed, I heard the commotion downstairs finally cease, followed by something more terrifying. That's when I hear footsteps coming up. The stairs, they were slow but heavy. I knew if I didn't find my phone quickly, I may never see daylight again. So in my frantic attempt to find my phone, I suddenly hit what appeared to be a drawer. That's when everything went quiet. I didn't even want to breathe. I knew I had stupidly blown my cover. I then heard the creep opening the doors to the other rooms. One by one, mine was at the end of the hallway, so I knew he would eventually inspect this room. As soon as I grabbed my phone, I crawled underneath the bed once more, where I instantly contacted 911 and said, "Hello, this is an emergency. There's a giant stranger, there's a giant man in my house, please help." I tried to keep my voice down as I described the man. At this point, I swear I could hear the man breaking more stuff from the 3 other rooms. "Hey buddy, where are you? Come out. Come out wherever you are." And that's when I heard my door creak, music open. I didn't move a muscle, I didn't even breathe. I held my hands across my mouth the entire time. And that's when the most terrifying thing happened. The man yanked me from underneath the bed and started slamming me onto it. I broke free from his grasp and was cornered by his enormous stature. That's when I slapped both of my hands on my cheeks and wailed in misery. I legitimately thought my life was going to be over until I heard several police officers shouting at the man to get on the floor. Since I lived next to a penitentiary, officers were always roaming close to my house, and it didn't take long until they barged through the front door and apprehended the man later on. I discovered that the creep was a convicted murderer who disguised himself as one of the security staff, allowing him to escape the prison. Consequently, when my parents found out about the incident, they finally decided it was time to move out and find a safer neighborhood to live. There's been something I've been needing to talk about for a few years now. It was back in my second year of college during my last semester at the university I started at. Before I transferred for reasons that will become obvious. It was wintertime, then snowing constantly. I always say the reason I transferred is because transportation was a huge drag, and it was. But that's not the full reason the buses were late all the time. And on the cold days when nobody wanted to walk, they were so jam-packed that there wasn't even a space for me to stand by the time it got to my stop. So I went about finding a different way to get there. But since I couldn't afford a car or even a bike, I had to walk, which meant I had to find a shortcut. I did find one, but it wasn't perfect. It was a trail that cut through the woods between the campus and my apartment, and it cut a good chunk of time off of my route. The only problem was that it passed by this old abandoned cabin. Well, it was abandoned, but it did have an occupant. It was some deranged old hobo guy who took shelter in it. When it was cold, there were legends about him at the school. We called him Santa because he apparently only wore an old Santa suit that he must have stolen from the mall. Years ago, it was alleged that he always had these reindeer in the cabin with him. I figured he was some kind of animal whisperer, like they were his friends or something, because he was too much of an outcast to have human friends. If he was just there, it wouldn't have been a problem, but he lived off the people that passed by on the trail. Whenever he saw someone, he charged them $1. It was like the toll for taking the shortcut, and for those who didn't pay the toll would end up on the naughty list. The guy was a real menace too. The only word he could speak was dollar, but other than that, he just screamed and grunted. Obviously, this was a terrible thing to have to go through just to get to class, but I gave the bus several chances, and it was honestly worse, even for as terrifying as the shortcut was. I put up with it and always had $2 in my pocket, one for each way. But one day, as I was passing by his house and walking up to it, because I never tried to sneak by out of the fear that he would chase me, I noticed that there were a ton of flies coming out of it. The whole thing reeked of crap. I held my breath and knocked on the door with my dollar in my hand, and right away the freak poked his head out through the gaps in the broken door, blaring at me with the most disturbing expression ever. Dollar. He then reached out his crusty old hand and grabbed my wrist, pulling me in closer to him. Dollar, dollar, dollar. I closed my eyes reflexively, and he shook my wrist until I let go of the dollar and yanked my hand back as he reached down to grab it. I ran away shouting and cursing him totally, about to piss myself that same day when I sat down for lunch with one of my friends. I told him about what happened. He never believed in the dirty Santa legend, though, and he seriously thought I was messing with him. I'm being for real, man. There's a dirty hobo dressed like Santa on the shortcut. He's crazy, dude. You're crazy. I've walked that trail, and I didn't see anybody in that cabin because you walked it in the spring. Santa only comes during the winter. Do you hear yourself right now talking about Santa Claus? Like, you still believe in him in your 20s. He's scary, man. You better not go down that trail without a couple bucks in your pocket or what? He'll put me on the naughty list. Yes, he will. You don't want that. Well, thanks for the warning, chicken. But I'm too broke to be scared out of my cash by some dirty hobo in the woods. I really did everything I could try to make him take it seriously, but he wouldn't listen to me. I was just hoping that I was being more scared than I needed to be, and that some of the legends I heard weren't completely true. I had to stick around for another class, but my friend was done for the day and went home. Right after lunch, I waved goodbye to him after I reminded him where the trail was, and I made sure he had $1, but I already knew he would want to keep it for himself. When I was finally free, I walked through the shortcut a little faster than normal. My heart sank when I saw a thick trail of blood on the trail leading right up to the cabin. My hand was shaking, but I walked up to pay my toll anyway, hoping that he had just hunted down some wild game in the forest or something. I knocked on the door and stuck my hand out with the $1. Clutch, didn't it? Averting my eyes until nothing happened. Hello, anyone home? When there was no answer, I slowly pushed the door open, getting my first good look at the interior of the cabin. I realized then that all those reindeer I'd been seeing weren't actually real, alive reindeer, but taxidermy fakes. There were dismembered deer parts everywhere, and heads up on the wall like trophies. About the whole thing like it was all just some terrible, awful nightmare. I couldn't even do that every time I closed my eyes. I saw my friend's head decapitated and hung up on the wall, like it was a hunting trophy, so I didn't close my eyes. I kept them open all day and all night, trying to not even blink. My neighbors found out I was going insane by the second day of that, and I used it as an excuse to blame my bad mental health on the university and get transferred. I ended up changing my major completely and taking some courses abroad just to get as far away from that school as possible. I never wanted to take that trail again. I didn't even want to think about it. But as much as I don't want to do it, I do still remember it every day. My friend was eventually reported as a missing person, but I don't even know if they ever found him. I'm not sure what even became of the dirty cabin Santa, or if people still have to pay the toll to walk that trail. Of course, I regret never saying a word about all of this until now, but at least I finally got it off my chest. I recently stayed at a hotel with my parents for an extended weekend over the holidays. We were at one of those really old hotels that used to be super fancy. When it was built 100 years ago, it was one of the biggest I'd ever seen, and it was the only place with any vacancy over the holidays when my parents booked the trip. I don't even know why they forced themselves into it. My mom and dad never got along, so they were only doing it so we could pretend like we were some happy, normal family for the holidays. They really didn't plan anything out either because there was literally nothing for us to do while we were there. The hotel had a really eerie vibe to it. It reminded me of the lodge from The Shining. And once that popped into my head, I couldn't stop seeing the similarities. There were no security cameras in the entire building as far as I could see, and not to mention there were so few guests in all those big, empty hall, always all in lobbies, that it felt like we were completely alone there. And of course, we got snowed in on the first night by a huge storm, so there was no chance of us going out to do anything. The whole time we were there, we did everything to avoid each other. My mom essentially never left the hotel room. She cleaned things even though we had housekeeping and lied in bed all day watching TV on the crappy satellite channels until she passed out at 3 a.m. My dad, on the other hand, was always busy working. No matter where he was some kind of old-timey mystery novelist, and get mad and yell at us if we got in the way of him working. Get out of here. Can't you see I'm busy working? Go back to the room. Now. He set himself up in the center of the biggest lobby and just typed his life away on that stupid typewriter all day long. Then he'd pass out on one of the couches in the lobby. I stayed in the room with my mom for the majority of my stay, bored out of my mind. By the time my mom let the 10th rerun of Titanic play on the TV, I got up and left to do something. Even if it was just wandering around. I did a lot of wandering around, actually, but only for the first couple days. After a while, I learned it's not a good idea to be alone in the hallways of that hotel at night. On the third night, I couldn't sleep after my mom went down, so I left the room and tried to find something. To look at it was the middle of the night, and everything was dead quiet. I must have walked a mile through the hallways and not seen or heard a single soul. I started to get lost in my thoughts. Then I rounded a corner and saw him. There was a man at the far end of the hallway staring at me. He was wearing a Santa Claus costume, except he lacked the big red coat and boots and was just wearing underwear. He stood on all fours like some sort of animal with his back hunched over. I froze and stared back at him. Then he waved at me, calling me over to him. "Hey, come here, what do you want?" "It's not about what I want, it's about what you want. It's Christmas, isn't it? You want presents, don't you?" "No, I think I'm good." "Nonsense, you deserve it. Come on, come here, don't be shy. I'm Santa Claus, you can trust me." I knew it was a bad idea, but I inched closer. This was the most interesting thing that had happened so far. It was sheer boredom and curiosity that pushed me forward. I walked slowly and cautiously down the hallway, keeping my eyes on him the whole time. But when I got halfway there, all of a sudden he darted around the corner and disappeared. When I got to the corner, I saw him, partway down the hall, peeking out the doorway of one of the hotel rooms, waving at me to come closer again. I was legitimately horrified by the way he looked, but the fact that he actually appeared to be staying in one of the rooms eased my mind a bit. I thought maybe he did have a bunch of presents in his hotel room, so I walked over to his door. By the time I got there, he was standing behind the door, prodding me to come inside. All I remember seeing was the lights turned off in the room. It was pitch black and I could just barely see the man's face. That's when he said, "Come inside, little..." One, I have all my presents right in here. Um, is, is it okay if you give them to me out here as soon as I said that? The smile on his face vanished. That's when the most terrifying thing happened. He lunged forward and grabbed me by the wrist, trying to pull me in. I pulled back against him and called out for help. Help someone get this guy off of me. Get inside, you spoiled little brat. Leave me alone, I'm calling to God. Somebody please help me. Shut up and get your press. There's no cops in this hotel, you idiot. He almost managed to drag me into the room, but at the last second, I managed to break free. I wasted no time running away at full sprint and raced back to my room. I slammed the door shut behind me, throwing the deadbolt and latch in the chain. I then dragged a rug out of the bathroom and shoved it underneath the crack of the door. That way, there would be no way on earth anybody could get in. I was so shaken up and paranoid that I checked under all the beds and looked behind the shower curtain. But it was just me and my mom alone in the hotel room. I had nobody to talk to and was forced to internalize the whole ordeal, as my mom was also passed out, so severely that she didn't even budge when I made all that noise coming in for the rest of the weekend. I never once left the hotel room for anything, not even to eat. I convinced my mom to order room service for the remainder of the trip. For some reason, I was too scared to even talk about it. While we were still there, I had planned on telling her everything when we got home, but I saw something while we were checking out that kept me from ever even thinking about that. While my father was still alive, I was disassociating behind the two of them while they were arguing in front of the clerk at the checkout counter, when I happened to notice something in my father's briefcase which he'd set on the floor beside him. It was overstuffed and wasn't closed completely, and there was a telltale red and white fluff of a Santa Claus costume sticking out of it, along with a half sheet of paper from the manuscript he'd been working on. All weekend, there was only one line on it, repeated across the entire pages, that read, "My son is on the naughty list and we pay for it. This Christmas,